Hello, everybody, and welcome back. It's always kind of a weird and happy feeling when you get to the very last chapter of a long book that you've been reading. But we are there. We are at the final chapter of Blackstone, and this is part 2 of that chapter. But first, Chris would like to say a big thank you to everyone who came along on this journey with us, and we're pleased to say that the sequel, his sequel, Skyfire, is ready, as promised, on Amazon and iBooks now. And at the time of us posting this, you have 2 more days to download Blackstone for free. All that Chris asks for in return is a review to encourage more people to join our adventure. Also, please do stick around at the end of the chapter because I've got a couple of announcements to make as well. Okay, so let's dive into the second part of Chapter 28, 2 Adversaries. Kerne had just escaped Veliados. Now we rejoin Leusios deep under the Blackstone. The song of the streams was playing on Leusios' nerves. The water running over the broken masonry of the ancient Elayna ruins echoed into infinity, uncaring that Leusios was caught in a life-changing decision. The charred corpses of his father and stepmother held him down on his knees, and Atraxian, in the body of Salo the Saboteur, stood triumphantly over him. "You need never face the divine in judgment," Atraxian repeated. "Immortality, Leusios. Think of the power you could amass given centuries of study. Of course, I have another option." Leusios didn't like the sound of another option. "What is it?" he asked guardedly. "You are a tool of chaos, Leusios," Atraxian grinned. "The game was set over 1,000 years ago, and now you are hurled in, a random factor to throw the board into disarray and question the rules. Within you is the essence of chaos, perhaps enough to break all 5 locks if wielded here." Atraxian spread Salo's arms wide. "In the heart of the Blackstone, we can cast down the rule of the great spirits and humble the divine together. Or," Atraxian made a sucking noise through Salo's dead teeth, "I extract what I need from you, like marrow from a bone." Again, Leusios saw the madness glittering within Salo's dead eyes. Could he trust a madman? "We're in a place of power," Atraxian had said. Yes, he could feel arcane energy bleeding off the black, crooked stalagmites. He focused on the nearest one and could see tiny scales. Whatever his sixth sense knew about magic, it now told him this was familiar. More of Atraxian's words came back to him. "Do you really think your stolen magic is a match for me?" Stolen. Leusios had taken magic from the beans on the margins of the Ruthiol. The river rose in the mirror mist after passing through this place. All around him the waters of Bryn Hedi flowed through this ruin and became imbued with heat and power. Power that lapped along the muddy margins of Elayna's bean fields where it had been trapped. At last he understood. "But it wasn't you who saved me from drowning," Leusios said slowly. "You hadn't even possessed Galen by then." "Come now, Leusios." Atraxian waved such trivial matters aside. He reached out both hands. "Join with me, and share the power I offer." Something had decided to save him as a baby when he and his mother Belwyn had been drowning in the river Ruthiol. If he was a tool of chaos, as Atraxian claimed, then something or someone had decided to do that to him and had turned his Keetish black hair to ice white. He had no idea who or what had saved him, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were here, under the Blackstone, right now. Salo's fingers opened invitingly. "Join my hands, and let us take this power, you and I." Atraxian smiled in excitement. Take? Atraxian was here as a thief. What if he, Leusios, already could take for himself what Atraxian offered him? Slowly but forcefully, Leusios stood. At first, Kerne and Geva resisted him. They hissed and struggled against his determination, and then suddenly fell back as if in fear. He looked into and through Sallow's eyes at the renegade Elayna beyond. "I made Blackstone prosperous. I'm turning the Keats from nomads into a nation. And I did it all without your help, without serving you." Sallow's lips pressed into an angry line. The charred corpses rasped voiceless threats from where they cringed at Leusios's feet. "How can I take power that's already mine?" Leusios declared, and planted a hand onto the nearest stalagmite. More than any bottle of bean essence, raw power tore through the palm of his hand and up his arm, through his mind and out into his senses. This was no simple rush, more than an inundation. It was all-consuming. "Get back!" shrieked Atraxian. White fire burst around Leusios and leapt at the charred corpses of Geva and Kerne. The demons shrieked as it consumed their corrupt essence in a heartbeat before their bones splintered into burning fragments. The air sizzled, and a crash of thunder smothered the song of the streams. Leusios screamed incoherently with the pain of the power. Before, he had released it into a magical casting, but this was too much. His skeleton became hot like molten lead. He wanted to break free and end it, but he couldn't. He surrendered his fate to a gamble, an act of faith even, that his instinct was right. A spell of breathtaking majesty coalesced from the vast arcane deluge around him and bleached the vast space white with blinding light. Elayna contemplated the stairs. They were narrow and steep, not ideal for a pregnant woman. She remembered the night she and Leusios had raced up these stairs and smiled fondly. At the top there was a candle to light her way up. A few years ago, Blackstoners had been content with rushlights made from the reeds growing on the banks of the Ruthiol. Then the Durians brought candles and delighted Dugain by buying his beeswax. Now the demand for candles outmatched what Dugain's bees could provide, and Gawain had been quick to seize the import trade for candles. The candle stood at the top of the stairs like a challenge. As she took the first step, Elayna made an inexplicable misstep, as if the ground itself had moved. The candle jumped and fell off its mount. "What's going on?" She stared at the candle, bemused, as it bounced down the stairs towards her. The ground, a solid and unchanging foundation that she took for granted, jumped. The floor bucked again, and Elayna staggered backwards, flailing for support. Cracks shot through the plaster on the walls, spitting fragments and bleeding powder. She fell heavily. Scrambling up was awkward, but she managed it. Leanne came in from the kitchen. "Blessed Divine! What's happening?" cried the housekeeper. The next shockwave made the floor jolt, scattering household wares and a crash of pottery and a clatter of wood. Grabbing Elayna by the arm, Leanne dragged her to the large table from Aquilanus, a gift to Leusios from Veliados for the lives saved on the plain of the Elder Tombs. Maybe it would save their lives. They scrambled underneath and sheltered there, but the anger of the ground did not abate. "What have we done?" wailed Leanne. "Nothing." Elayna hugged her close. "This is not the divine." They clasped their hands and prayed to Elayna to protect them, and Inaxos to bring order to his unruly sibling, but whether it was Orki or Murka at work, who was she to say? The shaking intensified further, and there was a crash from above. Plaster fell from the walls in chunks, and burning logs jumped from the fireplace. One rolled up to a drape and ignited it. "We have to get out of here," realized Elayna. The door flung open, and they saw a man's legs in riding boots. He stepped aside to dodge a rolling pot and shifted to balance on the bucking floor. "Mistress Miller!" a voice called, breathless from running. "Ledlos! Save us!" cried Leanne, and dashed towards the horsemaster and the open door. "No, Leanne!" Elayna hauled herself from under the table, but could not stop her friend as she ran to what she thought was safety. Ledlos caught the housekeeper by the throat and stabbed her 3 times, angling his knife up into the heart. Then he tossed Elayna aside. She dropped, gasping, her life bleeding out over Leusios's beautiful tiled floor. Elayna froze, staring at the Durian assassin. "So, it was you." Leusios smirked, impervious to the awful shaking and flickering flames around them. "I thought you were too close. I feared trouble when you came asking Heatha questions, but—" He gestured to the shaking walls. "Morsos answered my prayers. I'll burn your body with the house." "An accident," Leusios grinned. "A tragedy." Elayna should have screamed and run. That was what her rational mind wanted her to do. Instead, she bristled in fury. "You killed my father!" Leusios shrugged. "A mistake my paymaster at the time regretted. I, however, enjoyed it, and I'll enjoy this even more. First the father, now the daughter. I've never killed a pregnant woman before," he advanced with a chilling smile. "2 lives with 1 blade." There was no way out. Elayna ran for her father's sword hanging over the fireplace. A bold but futile gesture as Leusios closed in. Vibnia was wondering whether she should follow Leusios when the Blackstone shuddered with a crash of thunder. She tensed like a startled rabbit. The blast shook the stones around her and then died in the echoes of the vast chamber below. She released her breath in a gust of a sigh. "What are you doing, Leusios?" The silence continued for a few moments longer. Then came another blast, followed by a titanic roar. The spiral stairs were flooded by dazzling light, and the stone beneath her jolted. Then the sound changed to a rumbling grumble that resonated through every stone. By all the spirits, surely Leusios was either dead or lost. There was no time for prayers. Vibnia ran. Torch leading, she fled through the upended passages and rooms of the ancient citadel, hurdling the inverted doorways as her perfect recall traced the way back. The masonry grated, stone on stone, around her. She heard the clattering of the first blocks falling. Her legs may have been thin, but they were long and quick. With every footfall, she felt the tremble through her boots becoming more violent. The rumble turned into a roar. Entire buildings broke free from their roots and plunged into the darkness below. Others would have been terrified. Not Vibnia. Focus and faith buttressed her mind against panic, keeping her single-mindedly on the path home. At last she ran into the cathedral hall, just in time to see one of the great pillars tilt. Stonework splintered. With a terrible crack, it slid down like a tree being sucked into the earth. She scanned the geometric waves of stone vaulting between her and the rope to safety. Holes were appearing as roof blocks came loose and fell away. The great ribs of the ancient ceiling were her only hope, but it was too far. She needed more strength, more speed. "So be it," she whispered and pulled out her flask. Vibnia muttered the incantation under her breath to transform the liquid within. She took a long swig and then ran, feeling the power of the change in her muscles and lungs. She sprinted unerringly along its arcs as they juddered beneath her feet. It was a race. The magic pulsed through her as the collapse accelerated. Blocks between the ribs fell away faster, making the ceiling look more like a naked web of stone over the chasm beneath. Dazzling light pierced the gloom from below, and another roar boomed over the tumultuous death throes of the citadel. There was an ear-splitting crack as another pillar broke free and slid down, slowly at first, then gathering momentum. It did not fall straight, but at an angle, smashing a gash in the failing structure. The ribs around Vibnia shuddered as the web of masonry began to unravel, shedding stone into the abyss. She zigzagged from pillar to pillar, her feet unerringly racing from stone arc to stone arc, risking greater speed. She might slip and die, but any slower, and she was sure to be lost in the collapse. The last pillar she passed leaned over and emitted a tortured groan. The point where it was fixed to the Blackstone above shattered in a spray of stone splinters. Vibnia put all her trust in one last burst of speed along the crumbling stone rib and leapt for the rope. Her hands closed on it as the stone beneath her feet dropped into the void. A shockwave, larger than any before, ripped through Leusios's house. Tiles in the floor burst upwards, and the walls twisted. A beam came crashing through the ceiling, forcing Leusios to dive aside. Fixed on her goal, Elayna ripped her father's sword free from its scabbard. The assassin rolled and sprang to his feet, shaking his head and trying to blink plaster dust out of his eyes. Burning logs from the fire and fallen candles had ignited fabric and the woven willow of the interior walls. Flames rushed hungrily out from the kitchen and over the furnishings, while the stone casing of the building cracked and split. Elayna drove the sword point straight at Leusios. He twisted aside, trying to grab her, but misjudged through his watering eyes, and his hand closed on her sleeve. She turned hard on her heel, pulling herself free, but her ankle slid into a hole in the ruptured floor. Losing her balance, Elayna fell on her side, and there was a wrench of pain in her ankle. She tightened her grip on the sword, trying to get up, despite the trembling ground. Several blocks of stone crashed through the ceiling. Leusios loomed over her, pushing her shoulder down and forcing her onto her back. He angled his knife for his signature 3 thrusts. For the first time in his bloody career, Leusios paused. It was not pity. No, he was relishing the moment. However, the swell of her pregnant belly confused him, making it hard to gauge his entry point for the heart, and it took him a moment to adjust his aim. Into that brief moment, Elayna poured all her fury and all of her hate for the man who had stolen her father away from her. With a scream, she heaved the sword into a swing, landing its edge on his neck and burying it deep. His eyes widened in shock, and he reared backwards, choking and spitting blood. She wrenched the blade free and released a crimson spurt. He stared at her in astonishment, trying to clamp a hand over the severed artery, but his hand just slipped weakly on the rush of blood. "Who paid you?" she demanded, rising above him, brandishing her father's bloody sword. He opened his mouth, but only a trickle of blood came out. Then his eyes rolled up, seeing nothing but gathering darkness and flame. He fell backwards, gasping. The flames roared higher, and the masonry blocks fell faster around her, each one capable of crushing her skull. Elayna turned to run for the doorway, but it was blocked by debris. With a sob, she realized she was trapped. Elayna glanced at Leanne, her body trembling in unison with the shaking of the ground. Another pointless killing. She glared down at Leusios as he coughed up a spray of blood. She spat on him. "At least I killed you before I died." His eyes focused briefly on her, and his head lolled back, dead. Elayna hugged Hal's bloodied sword close as the room filled with smoke and flame. "I got him, Father," she coughed. "I got him." Then she touched her belly and wept, not for herself, but for the life that would never see the world. The dark heart of the Blackstone lit up with the searing brilliance of a desert sun and evoked a crushing downpour of masonry. Leusios had lost sight of Sallow's body in the intensity of the detonation. The power washed around him and through him, roaring and lunging as if alive, but it no longer tried to consume him. Instead, it embraced and nourished him with matchless arcane energy. He cast up a shimmering shield of blue light against the falling stone that would easily stave in his skull. Every impact on the shield drained his strength, and they came faster and faster, larger and larger. Strike by strike, he shuddered under the weight of masonry bouncing off his shield, aware that the wreckage was piling around him. Despite his mastery of the raging magic, the intoxication of the power slurred his mind, and the pain simmered in his bones. The source may be infinite, but he was tiring. Was he to be buried alive, or should he let his shield fail and accept a messy but quick death? No, neither. He had never accepted death before, and wouldn't now. He looked upwards at the ancient Elaeth citadel, ghoulously lit by motes of light scattering from whatever terrible spell had been unleashed. It was dying a second time, crumbling into a rain of rubble. "Leusios!" bellowed Atraxian. He saw Sallow's body wreathed in a blue-green fire and shimmering with a shield of his own. He, too, was being pounded by the rubble, Atraxian's power was burning through the body, making it wither and char.
"This is not over. I am coming for you and all of Blackstone."
A great pillar dropped from above. It flew like a spear hurled by the Evermighty. The pillar struck Atraxian's shield, shattering it into green sparks, an instant before it hit Sallow's body and obliterated him. Lucius groaned as another huge column splintered nearby. His strength was ebbing. Whole structures were crashing down around him. All was dazzling light and deafening sound. As the storm of stone reached its climax, just as Lucius's strength finally failed, the stones piled around him burst upwards. It was as if a great whale were surfacing beneath his feet. Lucius's last memory was of the 4 crooked stalagmites flexing and closing protectively over him. His mage light faded, and exhaustion swallowed him into darkness. One moment, Father Elias Gutarius had been at blissful prayer, feeling the harmony of the brethren as they chanted the ancient verses. In the next, their spiritual accord was shattered by a bellow. Unheard by mortal ears, it deafened him and his brethren, shaking them from their prayers. Tandebren had spoken. The Blackstone trembled. The fortress monastery shivered, and its ancient beams groaned all around him. Monks shouted and hurried from every direction to join him by the shrine. Throwing themselves to their knees, they clasped their hands in fervent supplication.
"With one voice, one heart, one soul,"
Elias called to them and led the prayer. He gasped as the third shrine began to shimmer with heat in defiance.
"Holy divine,"
he beseeched.
"Blessed ever mighty, grant your servant Inaxos sends us his strength and discipline. Bind us in our sacred duty. Grant that we hold back the chaos below."
A pulse of energy burst from the Blackstone, warping the air, bending light and stretching sound. Leusios felt it strike him, passing through his body like a volley of slingshots piercing his soul. The shrine exploded. The abbot reeled backwards, and one monk fell dead, a piece of white marble lodged between his eyes. The explosion reverberated through the ancient walls. Then there was a second detonation, and then a third. Each one shook the monastery from its highest tower to its deepest foundation.
"Blessed divine!"
wailed Leusios. For a moment he was tempted to despair. Then decades of monastic discipline snapped back into place.
"To the last shrines, my brethren! To the last 2 shrines!"
Elayna stumbled as a wave of energy passed through Lucius's blazing house. The moment froze her for a heartbeat. The smoke shimmered and the flames glittered as if reality strained to the point of fracturing. Then power swept through the walls and wrapped around her. She heard Lucius's voice shouting and the roar of a mighty beast. Then Kerne's voice called to her. To breathe is to hope. They reignited the one thought she had abandoned. To survive. That hope detonated a potency deep inside her, something impossible, something intoxicating. That detonation within her became a percussive sphere of force expanding outwards. It pulverized the walls around her to dust and fragments. The blazing timbers of the roof lifted clear and shattered into a spray of splinters and cinders. The terracotta tiles above disintegrated into a rain of crumbs that scattered far and wide across the town. Elayna staggered, overcome by a sudden weakness and exhaustion. The chill autumn air washed back over her from every direction, making her gasp. Then the warm afternoon sun touched her cheeks. She fell to her knees, safe in a circle of debris, cradling the sword in one hand and her pregnant belly in the other. All around she saw the ground rippling like water, making every home shudder. The memory of her last dream snapped into stark remembrance. The houses, the fires. No, it's happening, she gasped. Stiff stone bound by mortar could not bear such abuse. All around her, the new buildings of Leusios' boomtown were collapsing amidst an unrelenting rumble from the bowels of the earth itself. "Blessed divine," she whispered, grateful to be alive and yet appalled, as she watched years of progress and prosperity shaken into rubble and flame. Horth soared high in the afternoon sky, the sun glinting off his black wings that scattered its light into a dozen black rainbows. He felt the magic lift his wings, and it was wonderful. He looked down at the world below as the ferocious wave of chaotic energy rolled outwards, emanating from the Blackstone. It was a great circle, expanding ever outwards across the Kedish wilds and towards Duria. He felt 3 of the 5 remaining shrines shatter, and chortled to himself, "Well done, Leusios! Well done!" There wasn't an answer. "Oh well, humans, they mend in time." A tiny splinter from a shard born from chaos, Horth surfed the wave of magic and sang a song of freedom. Ackerbos Flax stared around himself. The mine nearest him had collapsed, and a plume of dust rolled over him. All around him the mountains shook. It was awe-inspiring and terrible for others, but for Ackerbos it was an opportunity. He moved quickly around the various sites, calmly observing the catastrophe in progress as miners fled their shafts in panic. It was an opportunity beyond hope or expectation. Yes, there was tragedy, too. Ackerbos's heart was not hardened to it. He would ensure help came to those who deserved it, once his mission was complete. He patted the pouch on his belt. Collapses, landslides, fires. He knew this was not the work of the divine, but he was a tool of the Evermighty, and the call to action was clear. He ran into the nearest mine shaft, plucking a Morbidunum fire gem from the pouch. Jorwin stared at the trees as they rustled without wind. He was close to his destination, a small homestead whose diligent farmers always showed him hospitality. They proved a good waypoint for crisscrossing the Kedish wilds, so he stopped there often. But something was amiss. Suddenly, every bird in the woodland took to the blue afternoon sky in a flurry of wings. There was a moment of silence, then an owl hooted. There was a distant rumble. Jorwin looked to the sky, but the clouds were soft and benign. He dropped his pack and knelt to put his ear to the ground. It trembled. Something was coming. The air sizzled as an unseen force made his skin rise in goose pimples. Then the wave struck. He cried out as he staggered and fell, as if caught in a great gust of wind. Nature shrieked in horror as the taint of raw and chaotic magic tore through her harmony in a single tempestuous breath. It passed, leaving an echo of unearthly power simmering in the trees. Jorwin lay there for several minutes until the last murmurs of the disruption had died. He closed his eyes and wished he was wrong. Then he glanced at the woodland around him. They would bother him if he disregarded this. They would not let this lie. "Scorch it! Better to do such bidding before it's bidden," he grumbled to himself. He cursed once more for good measure, and then shouldered his pack and turned northeast towards where the disturbance had come from, and started walking back to Blackstone. The Magister watched the physician prepare his burn ointments. She was nervous. Screams and shouts echoed through the palace corridors as the night's politics played out in murder. Paliados entered, spattered in blood. He strolled over, grinning boyishly. "Sephara is dead, and Hiatha is installed. We, the Invendamorsum, control the wealthiest trade center outside Duria." The Magister barely nodded where he lay in bed. The pain was constant. He beckoned the young man closer. "Is she one of ours?" he whispered. "Yes, she's the alchemist who supplies my poisons. That reminds me. Did you know Kerne is immune to poison? Neither potion nor blade venom affected him." The Magister resisted a frown. No, he had not. Suddenly, a pulse of magic swept through the room. The arcane energy caught his protégé, and the Magister gasped. As it shimmered around Valiados, it was as if a door opened to a vast echoing darkness beyond him. An entity of burgeoning malignancy, lurking outside reality, consumed the magic with a raging greed. Unseen until this moment, the Magister sensed it was more ancient than the Elaith, and utterly terrifying. The Magister was thankful that his face was covered in bandages. He had read the signs. Valiados had suited his plans as the perfect candidate to make the cults believe the Morsi Praenontius had arrived. He had not expected it to be true. He swallowed and took a moment to settle himself. "Was that a wave of magic?" asked Valiados, looking about in surprise. The young man had no idea. Perhaps his puppet would still let his strings be pulled. The Magister composed himself. He recognized the power signature of the ancient Elaith renegade interwoven with some amateur and Tan Ibrin itself. "Atraxian just tried to beat us to Skyfire and failed," the Magister rasped. "Next, he will use Vereg and his orcs. Fortunately, Calanthos stole the binding runes from the elder spirits. So we must move carefully and be ready to act because Blackstone will soon be at war." Kerne saw the lone rider under the expanse of stars. He had hidden in one of the many shepherd shelters to wash and bind his wounds, but he could not rest long. Valiados' assassins had to be close behind. The wound in his side was deep and aggravated by his desperate flight from the city. Now he stopped to tend the injury. Even he doubted his ability to heal it quickly. The riders slipped out of their saddle and advanced. Weak from blood loss, Kerne was still fired up by his determination to survive. He would see Elayna again. The knife he had just pulled from his shoulder was his only weapon. He raised it for one last battle. The newcomer laughed. "I beat you when you drew your great sword on me. Do you really think that you'll fare better with a knife?" "Pyrrha?" He took 2 steps closer to get a better look at the Drazian. "You caught me by surprise last time," he warned her. "How did you find me?" "I marked you with a finding spell. I knew the moment you left Copa." "And you set out after me?" "Yes. I was hoping you'd finally come to your senses." Her eyes flickered over him. "Something happened, didn't it?" Kerne gave voice to his pain. "You told me Valiados is a good man. He tried to kill me." "Really?" Pyrrha raised a confused eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I wouldn't join his Envenom Morsum." "The cult of cults?" Pyrrha shook her head in disbelief. They stared at each other for a moment. Kerne felt dizzy and relaxed his guard. "I've been such a fool." He punched the wall in frustration. Pyrrha came closer. "Put the past behind you. Now you can return and fulfill your duty." "What do you know of my—" Kerne hesitated, and then embraced the word. "My duty." At that moment, an unseen wave swept from the northwest. The stars burned brighter, and Kerne felt a shimmering light hit him. His nostrils flared with a tingle of spice, and his skin prickled. An invisible force passed through him, sending a shiver through every bone. The witch warrior inhaled sharply as her tattoos flickered with a fierce light, and they both staggered as if struck by a passing gale. "What was that?" Kerne gasped, his heart pounding. The Drazian looked down at her bare arms, watching her glowing tattoos fade back to their normal swirls of ink. Slowly, she turned to face northwest. "It was magic," she said. "More than this world has seen in an age. More since the fire and fall." "Where from?" Kerne asked. She turned her gaze back upon him. "Oh, Kerne, you came to your senses just in time. The board is set and now the pieces are moving. That was the Blackstone, calling you home." Here ends Blackstone. The story continues in Skyfire. As Blackstone lies in ruins, Vereg begins his war. Kerne races north to face Atraxian and Vereg, but the Envenom Morsum's plots are one step ahead as they all vie for the control of destruction itself, known to the ancient Elayth as Tan Ibren, to the orcs as Argak, or in the common tongue, simply as Skyfire. Thank you so much for listening to Blackstone. I hope all of you thoroughly enjoyed it. I do have a couple words from Chris he asked me to pass along. Chris has been a DM for many years, and he loves to entertain. He decided to write to share his ideas and his imagination, and he has been very moved by the positive response of this, his first book. So now, Skyfire is available on Amazon and iBooks. You can also find out more about the world of Blackstone at christomkins.co.uk. Don't forget to get your free copy now while you still can. And now I wanted to make a quick announcement about what's going on with me this year. I'm going to be taking a step back from doing the weekly podcast episodes, but it's actually for a good thing. I've got a lot happening right now as far as recording that's happening in the real world, and really it just comes down to a matter of time. We are going to be doing the audiobook version of Skyfire very soon. I'm also going to be putting up on Amazon the audiobook version of Blackstone as well as Bloodborne. Plus, we have another book that's going to utilize an ensemble cast from people on our Discord server. That will start recording this year, and I am set to start recording an entire new series once the author gets all the tweaks back from the editor. So, while I won't be putting out a reoccurring weekly podcast episode, I will still be producing original horror content with my Night Terrors series, as well as sleepy time, bedtime stories. And perhaps best of all, I'm still doing the live Drizzt readings. Every Saturday morning, I read live from the Legend of Drizzt. Currently, I'm on Passage to Dawn. All of the readings can be found on my Patreon for the members, as well as on my Discord. Whew, that's a lot. So thank you all for going on this journey with me. I can't wait to see where it takes us next. Safe travels, everybody.